Have you ever wondered what could possibly make a Viking afraid? These were men who set sail across stormy seas, raiding distant shores fearless, or so they liked to say. From the misty coasts of Ireland to the golden domes of Constantinople, they were known as the bringers of dread. And yet, there were whispers, quiet ones, spoken only around campfires late at night. Whispers of a people hidden far to the north, people who didn't just resist the Vikings, but made them tremble. This is their story. Let your mind drift now to frozen forests and snowy silence, to a place where the sky stays dim for days, and the cold bites through even the thickest wool. There, beyond the known maps, beyond even Viking reach, lived a tribe the Norse called the Watchers in the White Forest. No one really knew what they looked like. Some said they weren't even human, that they moved like shadows and vanished before you could lay eyes on them. A runestone was once found near Trondheim, half buried in the frost. Its carved lines read, "They see without being seen. They kill without warning." That was dated around the year 950, and even now no one really knows who carved it. But those watchers, they had a name, the Biamians. They lived in the snow-laced forests of what is now Finland, and in parts of Russia's far north. Unlike the Vikings, they didn't farm. They didn't build longships. They knew the tundra, the trees, and the quiet. They moved on skis, across snow like spirits. They hunted with silence. They slept beneath the frost and never left tracks behind. To the Vikings, they were unsettling. Imagine now you're a Norseman, raised by the coast, used to boats and battles. Then one winter you march into the white woods. The snow is deep. The trees don't end. And suddenly you feel it, that crawling sensation that someone or something is watching. But no one is there. Not a bird, not a sound, just wind brushing over icy pine needles. Some Vikings never came back from those forests. Others returned with wild stories, stories of eyes glowing in the dark, of warriors that moved through snow without breaking the surface, of sentries found with throats cut, no sound ever heard. The Biamians didn't fight like Norsemen. They didn't line up with shields and shout. They waited, they watched, and when they struck, it was over before you even knew they were there. Now take a breath and picture a landscape where the sun barely rises, where every footstep crunches over layers of ancient ice. And somewhere deep in those trees, someone is watching from behind a snow-covered branch, perfectly still. That's what the Vikings feared. Not a monster, not a god, but people who knew their land so well, they became a part of it. Let the silence of the snow guide you now. Drift slowly deeper into the white forest. The story continues soon. Have you ever walked deep into a snow-covered forest? Not the kind near towns or trails, but the kind where every tree looks the same, and even your own footsteps sound wrong. That was the world the Biamians knew. A place where the wind carried no voices, and the snow kept its own secrets. The Vikings, they weren't prepared for that. They came from the coast, from farms and ships. They were used to longhouses, loud songs, roaring fires. But in the north, there were no feasts, only silence. And silence is a powerful weapon. In the 9th and 10th centuries, as the Norse expanded across Europe, they ran into a barrier, not a wall, not a fortress, but a vast, quiet cold. It stretched across Finland and far into the Russian north, where forests grew taller than men's pride, and where the Biamians lived in ways the Vikings simply couldn't understand. They didn't settle in big towns. They moved with the snow. They hunted when the time was right and vanished before strangers even knew they were there. One Arab traveler, Ibrahim ibn Ahmed, wrote of them after visiting Viking markets around 920. They move across the snow like spirits, he said. Their feet wear strange bindings. They glide where horses die. He didn't know the word, but what he saw were skis and snowshoes, things the Biamians had mastered long before the Vikings ever saw them. They didn't wait for winter to end. They lived inside it. Let's pause for a moment, breathe slowly, and picture it. A narrow path through deep snow. No sun, only pale light filtering through heavy clouds. The trees press in around you, and somewhere ahead, just maybe, someone moved, or maybe not. That was the fear, that you were never quite sure. Even their clothes were different. Layers of fur, sealed with leather and plant fiber. Not wool, not linen, but reindeer hide, sälskin, fox, marten, each layer made for a different kind of cold. And the Biamians didn't build great halls. They built what they needed, when they needed it. Sometimes a shelter dug into the ground, half hidden by snow. Sometimes a lodge built in hours, then taken down the next day. They never stayed where they could be followed. The Vikings, they didn't understand this. To them, war was something you charged into. You raised your voice. You held your shield. You fought face to face. But the Biamians, they didn't follow those rules. They didn't leave trails. They didn't sing. They waited, watched, and when the time was right, they struck. Quick, silent, precise. One saga tells of Thoria, a Viking who led 30 men into the White Forest around the year 995. For 3 days they saw no one. No birds. No fire smoke. Nothing. But they felt it. That sensation, like eyes watching from behind the snow. On the 4th morning, they awoke to find their sentries dead, throats cut. No sound had been heard, just strange marks in the snow. Thoria fled. Only 11 men made it back. What kind of enemy leaves no tracks, and no sound, and no chance to fight back? The Vikings didn't know, so they began to whisper. Some said the Biamians could turn into wolves. Some said they walked through trees, or disappeared into stone. But the truth was simpler and scarier. They had learned how to use the land. Where Vikings sank into snow, the Biamians glided. Where Norse warriors grew numb and clumsy, the Biamians became sharper. Their forest was not a danger to them. It was an ally. Let the thought settle now. A people who never raised walls, but turned the wind, the ice, and the shadows into weapons. Sleep now if you wish. There's more to tell. But the watchers, they are always patient. Have you ever thought about what makes a warrior feel powerless? Is it a wound, the loss of comrades? Or maybe it's the unknown. The Vikings, they were strong, yes, bold, fearless, they said. But that didn't matter much when there was no enemy to fight. They came north with axes, swords, and tales of glory. But the Biamians didn't come out to meet them. They never lined up in open fields. They never shouted in challenge. They never gave the Norse the battle they wanted. Instead, they vanished and waited. One Norseman, a merchant who returned from the east, told this to a scribe in Constantinople. They strike like lightning and vanish like mist. No footsteps, no voices, just death. The Vikings, they tried to explain it. Some said the forest itself was alive. Others said they fought spirits, not men. And maybe, in the dark, they started to believe that, because when you're deep in snow, cold in your bones, and sleep never quite comes, fear grows louder than reason. Archaeologists centuries later would uncover the truth. The Biamians had weapons, yes, but not the kind the Vikings feared. They didn't carry heavy axes or steel blades. They used bows, light, quiet, deadly, and thin curved knives, sharp enough to cut clean, and silent enough to never be noticed until too late. Their spears were narrow, like needles, meant not for charging, but for finishing, for slipping through a gap, between ribs or at the base of the skull. They had rules too, but not the Viking kind. No duels, no glory, only precision and survival. 5 unspoken laws, they say. First, never fight directly. If the Vikings saw them, something had gone wrong. Second, use the land. The snow, the trees, the frozen lakes. They made secret trails where no horse could walk. They built traps hidden by powdery snow. They knew which ice would crack under Viking boots, and which would carry them like glass. Third, a fear, not just killing, but shaking the soul. They left signs, carvings in bark, bones arranged in perfect circles. Vikings found their dead, posed like offerings, eyes missing, arms folded, no blood, just cold. They started calling them spirits, not warriors, but something worse. Fourth, target the right men. Not all, just the leaders, the scouts, the ones who could shout orders. The rest would break. A mass grave found near the White Sea tells the story. 15 Vikings, 12 killed the same way. A blade slid just where the neck meets the spine. Quick, clean, dead. No fighting, no shouting, just nothing. And fifth, never stay. They moved like wind, never slept in the same place twice, never defended a hill or home. They just melted into the trees. Some say they trained children from birth, taught them to walk without sound, to shoot birds mid-flight, to stay awake for days. A chronicle from 1070 claimed, "They are not like us, not quite human, not quite animal. They are something else." Now, close your eyes and imagine you're one of those Norsemen. You've crossed the sea, marched for days, and now your men are whispering. They see shapes in the trees. They hear drums in the wind. No one sleeps. No one eats. And then a scream and silence again. That's how the Biamians fought. Not with strength, but with knowing. Not with numbers, but with the forest. And as Viking songs grew louder in the halls of the south, in the north, they grew quiet. So rest now, in that quiet. Let the cold trees watch over you. And know, the Biamians are still out there, in the snow, just waiting. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Not just a passing feeling, but something deeper, like the trees themselves had eyes. That's how it felt for the Vikings. They came into the forests with swords, but they didn't see enemies. They only saw fog, snow, and shadows, but the feeling wouldn't leave. They said they heard whispers, like voices carried on the wind. In no language they understood. They said something watched them every moment, and still nothing moved. The Biamians knew the mind was a battlefield. They didn't just win with blades. They broke men with fear. They created that fear on purpose. They carved strange runes into trees, left bones in patterns that meant nothing, or maybe everything. They made the Vikings wonder, not just where they were, but whether they were even human. A story from the saga of Halfdan the Black says, his men entered the forest around 870 CE. They never saw an enemy, but one by one they died. A sentry here, a scout there, no sounds, no blood trails, only silence, and the snow, always smooth again by morning. Some said they followed the shapes of men, who turned into wolves and vanished over cliffs. And the warriors, the proud shield men of Norway, they began to shake. They whispered, "We don't fight men anymore. We fight ghosts." But there were no ghosts, just skill and quiet and snow. The Biamians had gear the Vikings didn't understand. Footwear that spread their weight across the snow, so they left no prints. White fur cloaks that made them vanish, even when you were looking straight at them. Tunnels dug into hillsides, so they could appear from nowhere and disappear just as fast. And they moved, always moved. They never tried to hold ground, because ground didn't matter. They let the Vikings walk deep into the woods, then closed the door behind them. One grave tells a chilling tale. Near the White Sea, archaeologists found 15 Viking bodies. 12 had the same wound. A thin blade slipped between the bones of the neck. Not a fight, an execution. Clean, fast. The others likely didn't even run. They froze, paralyzed by fear or by not knowing when it would come. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Imagine yourself standing in that forest. The snow crunches beneath your boots. You hear the breath of the man beside you, but nothing else. No birds, no wind, just trees, and the white, and somewhere out there, not far but not near, someone watches. But when you turn, there's nothing, only snow, still untouched. That's the terror the Biamians used. The kind of fear that doesn't scream, but waits. The kind that breaks your thoughts, one by one, until the only sound left is your own breath. So breathe slowly now. The forest is still. Let the trees stand watch. More stories remain, but tonight we rest. Some forests aren't just made of trees. Some hold echoes, not sounds exactly, but something older, thicker. The Biamians lived in such a place. They didn't just move through the woods. They belonged to it, and to something more, something the Vikings couldn't name. The Norse had gods, yes. Odin, Thor, Freya. Their world was wild, magical, but it followed rules. Biamians had no such order. Their world was shadows and whispers. Not stories, but presence. To the Vikings, it was terrifying. A missionary named Tangbrand, who traveled north around 997, wrote, "They wear masks of bark and bone, and speak not with spirits, but as them." He said they didn't bury their dead, didn't burn them, they kept them in huts, wrapped in fur and bark, still sitting, watching. It sounds impossible, but the graves confirm it. Mummified bodies, perfectly preserved, placed in wooden chambers at the edge of villages, not hidden, not feared, but honored. Their eyes, gone, their mouths closed with braided grass. But to the Biamians, they weren't dead, not quite. They were waiting. Now imagine, you're a Viking warrior. You've seen battle. You've survived storms at sea. But now, you're deep in a silent forest. You come upon a hut. Inside, a figure sitting upright, wrapped in fur, face dry and hollow, eyes missing, and yet, you feel it, it's watching. Would you sleep well that night? The Vikings didn't. Some refused to stay in camp. Others began to whisper that the forest was cursed. They'd heard drums at night and howls that didn't come from wolves. The saga of Egil Skallagrimson tells of one such moment. He and his men watched from a ridge as a ritual unfolded. A great fire burned. Figures danced around it. One wore a bear skull as a mask. Others crawled like wolves. A drum beat faster and faster, and suddenly, they weren't people anymore. They were something else. Egil's men ran. Modern scholars say it was a trance, a ceremony. They used mushrooms and rhythm and movement to shift between states. Not magic, maybe, but to the Vikings, it was magic. And worse, it worked. The Biamians blurred the line between man and beast, between living and dead, between real and something else, and they used it as a weapon. Along the paths Vikings would take, they placed totems, wooden faces, animal heads, symbols carved into stone, sometimes the bodies of their own fallen, left posed, eyes removed in circles of antlers. One Viking wrote in a saga book, 7 of our scouts, all dead, no blood, weapons still at their sides, and around them, wolf tracks, but no tracks coming or going. The Biamians had staged it, moved the bodies, erased their footprints, but the message was clear. You are not welcome here. This fear, it grew into something the Norse called the Biamian dread, a fear that couldn't be fought with steel, a fear of eyes unseen, of spirits that left no trace. Even warriors who had stood against armies began to shake at the sound of a twig breaking. Some refused to stand watch. Others refused to sleep. They said the forest people came to them in dreams, that their breath turned cold, even near the fire. So now, close your eyes. The fire is low. The drums are faint. There is snow on the roof. And the forest is listening. But you're safe, because you're still, because you're quiet, just like them, just like the watchers. Have you ever wondered what happens when an unstoppable force meets a place that simply refuses to move? That's what King Olaf of Norway asked himself before he set sail to the north. He wanted to bring the Biamians under his rule, under his god, under his sword. But the forest had other plans. The year was 1026. 15 ships, 500 men, priests, warriors, traders, they all came. Olaf believed the Biamians would run, like others had before. They didn't. Instead, they vanished. For 20 days, Olaf marched, empty villages, still burning fires, warm food left behind, but no people, not even footprints. He claimed victory. He baptized rivers. He raised crosses in silent fields. And yet, every night, his men heard sounds, drums, voices, but no one was there. The further they went, the deeper the silence became, until they reached the sacred lake. An island stood at its center, buildings with gleaming roofs, smoke rising from chimneys, shadows moving behind walls. Olaf believed this. Was it the heart of the Biamians? He smiled, and he ordered his men to land. But what he saw was not a village. It was a stage, a trap. The roofs were polished bark. The buildings were hollow shells. And the smoke? Only wet moss burning slowly to deceive. As the first ships touched land, the fire began. Not normal fire, but something worse. Arrows lit with thick black pitch, burning even on water, even in snow. The flames clung to wood and to skin. Men jumped from the deck screaming. Ships cracked and burned. Some ran to shore. But from beneath the huts, Biamians rose like ghosts. They had tunnels, hidden doors. The Vikings were surrounded. More ships tried to rescue them, but fire rained from the trees. And then came the mist. First, Olaf thought it was fog, a blessing, but as it reached the boats, his men began to cough, to choke. They gasped, eyes burning. Some jumped into the lake. It wasn't fog. It was smoke mixed with sulfur. The Biamians had poisoned the wind. By nightfall, only 2 ships remained. King Olaf survived, but he coughed blood for weeks. His warriors, those who lived, never spoke of the forest again, not loudly. The Biamians didn't just fight. They prepared. They learned. They turned trees into traps, lakes into mirrors, and fire into silence. They didn't win by strength. They won by knowing how the land breathed. Now imagine the fire's out. Smoke hangs low. The lake is still. Ash floats like snow. And the trees whisper again. You're not running. You're just remembering. And as sleep finds you, you understand the forest never fought back. It simply waited for you to leave. The battle had ended. The fire was gone. The smoke had drifted. The lake returned to stillness. The Vikings did not come back, not in force, not in glory. After that day, the forest grew quieter. And yet, the world did not stop. It never does. As the years passed, things began to change. The old kings died. New rulers rose. Some still dreamed of conquest, but most dreamed of silver, trade, not war. Ships returned to the north, but they came bearing gifts, cloth, coins, salted meat, and they came with less pride in their voices. The Biamians didn't forget, but they watched, and they weighed their choices. One year, they appeared on the lake's edge, 20 sleds, furs stacked high, ivory, amber. They didn't bring weapons. They brought silence. The Norse offered silver, and the trade began. They say, that month was sacred. No one drew a sword. No blood touched the snow. For 9 days they traded, and for 9 nights, not a single voice was raised. Even the shamans and the Christian priests stood side by side, each whispering to their gods. But not all trade was peaceful. Some Vikings wanted more fur, more wealth, and they tried to take it. Small raids, quick attacks. But each time, the snow answered back, and it always answered. with silence. One Viking warband followed a guide. He led them to a sacred clearing, a treasure mound guarded by wooden idols. They filled their chests, 12 of them, and they left before dawn. But the forest was not empty. That night, strange cries echoed through the trees. By the third day, only one ship returned. 8 survivors, shaking, crying. They spoke of shadows, that war faces not of men, and sounds that didn't come from mouths. So the message was clear. Trade was possible, but greed had a cost. Over time, things softened. The Norse and the Biamians no longer fought as enemies. They became something else. Not friends, not brothers, but neighbors, sharing the edge of the same world. The Biamians still wore their white cloaks, still sang to trees, still carved bones. But sometimes now, a Viking stood beside them, and sometimes the coins they traded carried the cross. Now, let that image settle in your mind. Not fire, not blood, but a quiet trade, in a quiet land, forest that remembers, and 2 peoples who no longer need to fear each other, only to understand. Some stories aren't about battles. Not really. They're about what happens when one world looks into the mirror of another and doesn't like what it sees. The Vikings came from a world where men ruled, men fought, men spoke at the gatherings, women had places, yes, but not at the front of the warband, not in the center of the firelight. But the Biamians, they did things differently, and that difference shook the Norse in ways no blade ever could. A chronicler named Adam of Bremen once wrote, "Among the Biamians, a woman may be chief, or shaman, or both." He said, "They led war parties, cast omens, and demanded tribute, and the Vikings couldn't quite accept it." One saga tells of a raid. A Viking party ambushed near a frozen river. The one who led the Biamians that day was not a man. She wore white fur, her hair pale as snow, but her face young. She carried a horn bow, her hands steady, her voice silent. They say she raised one hand, and her warriors attacked. Without a sound, she lowered it, and they disappeared again. One of the Norse warriors, Thoria, died that day, an arrow through his eye. Two men stood beside him with shields, but they never even saw her draw. The survivors? They didn't say her name. They called her the Witch Queen, but deep down, they knew she was no witch. She was simply something they had never imagined. Because when you're raised to believe that strength wears a beard and that command speaks with a low voice, a woman who does both, and better, feels like something unnatural. But the Biamians didn't see it that way. In their world, power came from the forest, from the spirits, from the snow, and the snow doesn't ask what gender your feet are. It only cares if you can walk in silence. In their graves, women were buried, with knives, with bows, with drums and masks. In one they found a carved staff, symbols etched in bone. In another, silver from Norse lands, and antler charms stained red. These were leaders, hunters, voices, not daughters waiting to be married. Now imagine you're a Viking warrior. Your sword has been tested, your honor proven. You've stared down kings. But now you kneel, bleeding, and the one who stands above you is a woman, not a goddess, not a dream, just her, real, unshaken. And for the first time, you wonder, was your world ever whole? Some tried to explain it away. She was a spirit, they said, a trick, a curse, because it was easier than saying the truth out loud, that she was real, that she was better. Even Viking merchants began to notice. They spoke of older women at trade posts, tattoos on their faces, sharp eyes that missed nothing. One wrote, "She bit the silver to test its worth. She smelled the cloth and saw through lies. And if offended, she ended the trade without a word." So little by little, the Vikings learned, maybe not loudly, maybe not quickly, but in the sagas that came after, the women grew stronger. The shield maidens became more than myth. The Valkyries gained names, faces, and voices. And if you look closely, you'll find her there, the woman in white, the one who stood without fear, not to conquer, but simply to remain. Asterisk now rest again. Let her pass in your dreams. No need to fear. She is not here to harm, only to remind you that strength has many faces. Asterisk. All stories fade. Even the sharpest blade rusts. Even the loudest drum goes silent. And even the fiercest warriors become only names in old songs. The Biamians were never conquered, but they were never truly seen either. They didn't build monuments, didn't carve their history in stone. Their memory is in the snow, in the trees, in the way the mist moves across a frozen lake. At dawn. As the years passed, the great Norse kingdoms grew quieter. The dragon ships stopped sailing so far. Their gods were replaced by another. And the Biamians? They didn't vanish. Not all at once. They drifted. Some moved deeper into the forests. Some traded. Some blended. And some just disappeared from the records. One monk, writing in 1290, said this: "They live still beyond the mountains. They keep their dead close. They speak to trees, but fewer each year remain, who remember the old songs." And maybe he was right. Maybe they slipped beyond the reach of maps. But traces remain. Carved post, half buried in moss, a circle of stones. That doesn't quite look natural. A rusted arrowhead, beneath the roots of a birch tree. And the stories, always the stories. One Norse merchant, many years later, wrote, "My grandfather told tales of women who called storms, of men who wore white fur and left no footprints." He paused, then added, "I trade now with the people of the North. They are Christians, mostly, but their eyes are older than their prayers." So now, rest easy. The battle is long gone. The lake has frozen over. And the watchers, they are quiet. They have always been quiet. But if one night you find yourself walking alone beneath the pines and you feel a presence just beyond the fog, don't run. Just listen, because not all who vanish are lost. Some simply return to the trees. Let the snow cover the footprints now. Let the mist close the story. Let sleep take you. The forest will remember, and so will you.